Greetings, everybody. Come on in, keep getting food, keep getting drinks. I'm going to encourage that as we go. Let me introduce myself on behalf of the Laboratory to Combat Human Trafficking. Welcome to the Colorado Project 2023 release party. That's right, it is a party. It is 2023. We're so glad you're here. I'm just going to give a few little notes here as we get going before we get into the real part of the program here. My name's Craig Nason. I'm the Development and Communications Director at LCHT. And this is an exciting night. Action plan in hand, new report in hand. I see some people that are flipping through that. We're going to be talking about that tonight. But just a few things about the space here tonight. I want to encourage people, if you would be so bold, thank you, front row and second row and third row friends, because we think some people may be coming in later and we want to leave seats in the back for them. Would love people to scoot up a row or two. You can do that right now as I'm going, but there's space up here if anyone wants to be kind and help us just kind of fill the space up this way. You can go ahead and do that. I also want to encourage folks to please feel free to get up during the program. We want you to have the food. We're so excited to have food and drinks for you back there. And so please feel free to continue getting food during the program. For those who don't know, there are two bathrooms here in the Posner Center. There's an all-gender restroom right around the corner of the stairs here on the first floor. And then there's a women's restroom upstairs to the right. So that's where the bathrooms are. You can look out for that. We made it. The Colorado Project 2023. I want to get just another, come on, a little energy. So many people involved in this. I'm curious, how many people in the room here, is this the first time you've been in the Posner Center here at LCHT's office? A lot of people. Wow, that's awesome. Welcome. Let's give them a hand. We're just going to clap for everything tonight. Let's just do that. How many people, is this the first time you've been at an LCHT event anywhere at any time? Raise your hand. Okay, come on, let's clap for those folks too. That's really exciting. We're excited to get to know you and hopefully connect. If you're in the room tonight, it's because you care about ending human trafficking in Colorado. And that's the work that we do at LCHT. That's what this report's about. And it's about the community of people in our state that care about this issue. And so along with listening, we hope tonight's a night for you to connect with someone new who also cares about this issue and find some people who are like-minded and want to help end exploitation in our state. Tonight is about listening and learning. And let me just say that the way we designed this program out front here is we have a lot of friends and people who collaborate with us, people who are involved in the research that are going to be joining us on the stage shortly, momentarily. And we wanted to feature as many people as possible. And because of that, we don't really have time in this program for Q&A from the stage. But we know a lot of you want to talk about this research or have conversations afterwards. So I just want to encourage you, we'll be here after the program. We're excited to talk. I know the folks on the stage would love a conversation too. For those of you who are active on the social medias, would love you to follow, post, tag the Laboratory to Combat Human Trafficking. That's a long name. We are Lab, L-A-B, the number 2, C-H-T, at Lab 2 C-H-T on most of the socials. X is still out there, Instagram, Twitter, whatever you want to call it. Would love for you folks to post if you'd like to tonight. That would be fantastic. And finally, the Colorado Project has produced a full report. I held that up right here, so nice. And an action plan that's a bit shorter right here. And we know many of you are interested in having the report. We have some of those available if you're interested in having a full report. You can see us at the LCHT table afterwards. But for everyone, we'd love for you to take an action plan with you. Like I said, some are out on the table, but there are others back at the LCHT table that we can give you afterwards. And of course, you'll see this URL. Everything about this research and this report and the action plan are available online, combathumantrafficking.org/Colorado. And on our website right now. We're also live streaming tonight, so we may have a few friends joining online. Thank you for joining us that way. And you can watch this program afterwards on our YouTube channel. So lots more to come in the weeks ahead around this report and stories out of this, the findings, partnerships that are working on the issue. But without any further delay, let me introduce my boss, my colleague, my friend, Amanda Finger, the Executive Director and Co-Founder of the Laboratory to Combat Human Trafficking. Amanda.
Thank you all for coming this evening to mark this milestone of 10 years since our first publication in 2013, now our third iteration in 2023. So the full title is the Colorado Project to Comprehensively Combat Human Trafficking. We're into long names at this organization. So I could not be more thrilled to share these findings tonight on behalf of the organization, but also from a personal space. In 2009, I was one of a handful of folks who were designing a grant proposal for this project as part of a Mission Without Borders Impact Award. We had been posed the question from Gail Embry from the Embry Family Foundation, what would it take to end human trafficking in Colorado? My co-founder, AJ, and I flew to Dallas to pitch this project, and as we arrived at the airport that evening for our flight back to a very snowy Denver, we received news that we had received funding to move forward. They also believed that this project could have great impact. And so in 2010, LCHT set to work, and our approach to this very broad question of what it would take to end human trafficking in Colorado was to immediately enlist colleagues, practitioners, researchers, and survivors to design ways to listen to our communities across the state and learn about our collective responses to human trafficking. And we knew we wanted a few things. First, to honor and celebrate all the efforts that are underway. Second, to unearth our gaps or challenges so that we can improve our long-term response. And third, to make it really useful and not just a report that sits on a shelf. So now every 5 years, we essentially pause to take a pulse of how Colorado is responding to human trafficking. This is what we believe is critically important to measuring social change over time. If we don't take this time to pause and listen to our communities, to hear the feedback and give the feedback of where and how we can improve, then how do we know what kind of a difference we are making to address exploitation in Colorado? There's not a national action plan organizing all 50 states. This project is unique to our state. And man, has our world changed since our last Colorado Project 2019 report. Task forces and coalitions working to end exploitation have persisted despite the challenges of a once-in-a-century, knock on wood, global pandemic, for example. And our focus this year was to interview those 18 task forces, those partnerships around the state, specifically how trust, equity, and effectiveness have the potential to support or hinder collaboration in the anti-trafficking field. So let me share a bit about the humans behind this project, those of whom you'll hear from shortly. So there were 4 principal investigators leading this project, spearheaded by Dr. AJ Alejano Steele, my co-founder at LCHT and our research director and longtime faculty member at MSU Denver. The 3 additional PIs are members of our board who represent different disciplines and local universities. Dr. Annie Miller from UC Denver School of Public Affairs, Dr. Patricia Valverde from Colorado School of Public Health at CU Anschutz, and Dr. Julie Laser from University of Denver Graduate School of Social Work, also fabulously on a sabbatical abroad. But AJ counted the participants over the past 3 years that we've been working on this project to build up to today, totaling 75 contractors, interns, advisors, and staff. So a lot of humans put effort into these reports that will not sit on shelves. So without further ado, just to talk a little bit about who you're going to hear from tonight. And some of those individuals have worked very closely with us as consultants with lived experience, including Emily Warfield, Anastasia Lynch, Rebecca Layton, and Jose Alfaro, to inform, develop, and review interview materials, literature reviews, conduct data collection, and review findings. Additionally, we have several of you from our advisory committee who helped turn that data into data-driven recommendations, many of whom represent practitioners and survivors statewide. Also in the room tonight, we have philanthropic partners who contributed funding to help us to truly take on this kind of project. Rose Community Foundation, Red Empress Foundation, and PB&K Foundation. So as far as our participants you're about to hear from this evening, they're going to really give voice to the findings and the recommendations that we have learned from so many conversations across the state. These are some of our really close collaborators who are direct service providers, partnership leaders, lived experience experts, and some of our team members. We learned so much from all of the surveys, interviews, and focus groups, but tonight's focus will be on 3 key takeaways from the report. First, housing instability and homelessness remain a top challenge for survivors of human trafficking in Colorado and the systems that serve them. Second, marginalized groups including immigrant and tribal communities, individuals who hold LGBTQ+ identities, and youth experiencing homelessness continue to be more vulnerable to exploitation in Colorado. And third, anti-trafficking partnerships still lack critical representation in their coalitions necessary to be more effective. So I invite you to listen deeply to the wisdom of these individuals who care tremendously and are doing work day in and day out to address exploitation. I also invite you to help us amplify these important messages in your community and the work that you're doing. Progress toward ending human trafficking in Colorado is only possible if we all work together. I hope tonight inspires you to continue to work toward that goal, to make connections with the many dedicated folks in this room who share that vision. Thank you so much for being with us here tonight.
Thank you, Amanda. So thank you for your leadership for the organization on this issue. Tonight is going to be basically 3 conversations that we get to listen in on, which is really exciting. So as I get ready to introduce the folks in the first conversation, I'm going to actually invite them to come up to the stage as I'm introducing them now. So thank you, team. This first one here, we're going to be joined by Caleb Stewart, who is a senior staff attorney with the Rocky Mountain Immigrant Advocacy Network, or RMIAN, many of you know. He works with clients to know their rights, specifically around helping survivors who may be eligible for T visas. He's a longtime leader in this work, an incredible partner with LCHT. His work is actually featured in a story inside the report. We have Karen Napolitano, human rights advocate and trainer. She's my colleague at LCHT, our research and training manager. You've trained over 25,000 people in Colorado. Who knows, you probably added 50 or 100 today. That number might be off. Around Colorado communities to recognize and respond to this issue. And this conversation is going to be hosted by Dr. Patricia Valverde, who is a clinical assistant professor at the Latino Research and Policy Center at the Colorado School of Public Health at CU Anschutz. Whew, say that 3 times. Dr. Valverde is also a co-principal investigator on the Colorado Project, and she's a member of LCHT's board. So welcome our first conversation. I'm going to hand this off to Dr. Valverde.
All right, great, thank you. Okay, so we heard Amanda say that homelessness and housing instability is one of the priority challenges noted in this report. So let's start with Kara. You know, many of us read and see and hear about the issues around housing in Colorado, so it's no surprise to us. So if you could please tell us more about what you heard from people around the state regarding housing and what it means for folks working in anti-trafficking efforts.
Yeah, I can do my best. Okay, this is working, right? Yeah. Okay, so I mean, I think it's no surprise that housing is an issue in Colorado. No one is surprised by that at this point. But I'll start with just how we see this affecting populations that may be being exploited. So we see it as like both a push and a pull factor, where housing insecurity is sort of pushing people into the precarity that can lead to potential exploitation. We also see that happening in domestic violence situations where someone could like threaten the loss of housing as a coercive tactic to hold someone in place. And then we see people targeted because they already lack housing, people who are experiencing homelessness and who obviously have that need, especially in the winter when it's a very cold place that we live in, right? So we see it, affecting populations in lots of different ways, or sort of affecting the issue in lots of different ways. And besides that, we have a lack of housing and a very expensive housing market. We just have a dearth of opportunities to house individuals who might be looking for an alternative to what they're currently, sort of being coerced into staying in, or who are looking to get off the street and get out of a potentially dangerous situation. So there's only a very small handful of actual housing options that are dedicated to human trafficking in the state. And then we sort of cobbled together the rest of the resources by working with domestic violence shelters and homeless shelters. So that's a little bit of the landscape. And what people were saying in this project was just that they really couldn't find beds, right? We have all of these options, but they're often full. And so we're giving out numbers, and we're making calls for folks on the human trafficking hotline, and advocates and case managers around the state are doing the same, and we're just coming up with full beds, not a whole lot of options, and really having to get creative using hotel vouchers. So yeah, that was like the biggest thing that we heard. And we also heard that in some cases that people thought that perhaps people that were already working in shelters where trafficking survivors were showing up were maybe missing it. Someone was showing up experiencing homelessness or disclosing domestic violence or interpersonal violence, but not necessarily disclosing the experience of trafficking, and that the employees, the staff at these shelters weren't necessarily trained to recognize it. And so it was just sort of a missed opportunity.
Great, thank you. All right, now Caleb, in the report, we identified that marginalized groups, which include immigrant and tribal communities, individuals with LGBTQ plus identities, and youth experiencing homelessness, continue to be the more vulnerable to exploitation groups in Colorado. So we can't talk about all of the groups right now, but if you could please speak more directly to the immigrant population based on your longtime work at RMIAN, and what are your efforts in this area, and what tools do you and RMIAN bring to support survivors?
Yes, when you're looking at human trafficking, a lot of times what it starts with is vulnerabilities that are being targeted. And so as a legal nonprofit, specifically an immigration nonprofit, we're working with individuals that have traveled or migrated from another country and may or may not have status to stabilize their situation here. And so when they don't have that stable situation, either because they don't have work authorization, they have fear that they may be sent back to a country, or they have fears that they could be killed in that country, then they're in that vulnerable situation where someone can take advantage of that and say, oh, I'll help you out. And then once they get control of them, they say, well, now you need to work for me doing these things. And if you complain, I'm just going to call immigration and get you deported. And they don't know that they have other resources or other opportunities. And so we're trying to work with those individuals to let them know they do have other options to get them out of that situation. The tools that we get to use, like when I was leaving after having lived abroad a number of years, I was like, well, I want to continue working with migrant populations, but how can I work with them? Well, I need a tool to help them. Well, as an attorney, the tool I decided to go get was to go to law school. And so with a legal degree, I have a tool where I can try to get them status, try to let them exert or search for their rights so that they can know and then go and claim the rights that they do have here in the United States.
Great, thank you. All right, so going back to Kara and talking about housing instability. So you talked about the push-pull effect and the difficulty in finding beds. So let's get kind of specific. Where do we start? It just seems so overwhelming. So what actions do you think we can take to relieve some of those pain points in housing that connect to exploitation?
Okay, that's a tough one.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we do have some takeaways. There's some really amazing humans doing really impressive work, innovative work around the state. So, it's really about sort of elevating those voices and those accomplishments, and then making sure that the rest of the state knows about what these individuals are doing so that we can replicate. So a few things that are sort of like low-hanging fruit is around training and education. So getting into those shelters that already exist. In an ideal world, we get that 1.7 billion jackpot from Powerball and just build a whole bunch of shelters, but I don't see it happening anytime soon. So instead, again, just sort of getting everyone trained that works in the existing shelters to make sure that they understand how trafficking is likely to show up in those shelters and what they should do next, right? How to develop a protocol, make sure they know about the human trafficking hotline, make sure they have relationships with local law enforcement and then other service providers in the region so that they can make those trusted referrals for individuals who have experienced trafficking. So that's one thing, training. Another thing is allocating beds. So that's something that we're really going to work on this year, next year rather, in 2024, is going out to these shelters and trying to kind of create relationships where we can have 1 or maybe 2 beds allocated, so that when we get those calls, we do have a place to actually put someone, right? That's something that we're really struggling with. I'll also mention like another sort of side project that we're working on, sort of an offshoot of the Colorado project right now. We did some listening sessions over the last month with, based on this, the takeaways from the Colorado project. We decided to do these listening sessions with housing providers, both in the greater Denver area and then throughout the balance of the state and everywhere else, essentially, outside of the 7 counties in the greater Denver area. And we asked them specific questions around challenges and innovative solutions in housing models. And we are coming together to workshop those. So on November 7th, we're coming together in the greater Denver area in person for a 3-hour workshop where we hope to come up with some more innovative solutions to this question. And then we're going to do the same thing online for those in the balance of the state in the end of November. So stay tuned for some more interesting things coming out of those conversations in the coming months.
Great, thank you. All right, now to Caleb. So I'm going to ask you the same question, but regarding immigration and for migrants. You know, that's a huge issue right now. The number of people arriving in Colorado without housing, without legal status. I hear about that quite a bit, in the news and with colleagues. So what are some actions that we can take in order to help alleviate or reduce the potential for exploitation of those very vulnerable individuals?
Addressing the issue of the challenges with immigration and is way beyond the scope for today. There's a lot of things that need to be done to change, like federal policies and things. But when you're looking at how to assist them as they're coming in, it is just trying to recognize that there are resources, and so you're doing as much work in the community to let them know those resources. Like we had some collaboration that's going on between law enforcement and other social service providers that are trying to go into some of these shelters that are set up for recent arrivals to give them some information about what their rights are, about where they may be able to find resources, and what human trafficking is. Because as you're looking at housing, it shows up both in the issues that Kara was talking about how it can be what pushes them into the trafficking situation. It's also the challenging once they're leaving the situation so they don't fall back into human trafficking. When they're trying to get stable in the United States, like some of the things that we're trying to get them connected to quickly is to know whether they do qualify for any type of immigration relief, because they may. And so it's getting them connected to somebody that can evaluate that case and say, okay, well, actually, there's a new policy for Venezuelans right now that says you can apply for temporary protected status. It just happened. You may not know about it, but now you need to get the word out so they can try to get that status to get stabilized, because it's that instability that often leads to the trafficking.
Thank you. All right, so Kara, so talking about the research that was done through the Colorado project, is there anything else that you would like to add in terms of, how can we increase prevention efforts for, many of the groups that we had, mentioned that are vulnerable to exploitation, and also to support survivors more effectively? What did we learn?
Yes, again, like it's like impossible to talk about the entire scope of this, so I'll just choose one thing. I think in talking to tribal communities and also indigenous folks who are living in urban centers across the state, we heard a lot of fear, we heard a lot of mistrust, a lot of misidentification issues. Folks really not knowing that there are something like 200,000 indigenous people living in the state of Colorado, mostly in Denver and Colorado Springs. So a lot of culturally, really seeking culturally appropriate resources, and sort of a dearth of that as well. So I think there's a few ways that we can work in prevention, and alongside our allies who are working in MMIR, Murdered and Missing Indigenous Relatives. I'm sure people know that office was established with the passage of legislation in 2022. So we have a new office under the Department of Public Safety. And I think really just paying attention, right, to how we can support that work that they're doing, how we can help inform it, really the modifications that they'll be making to that legislation and to that office over the coming years, I think will be really cool to see what comes of that. So that's one thing. I think just sort of general awareness of tribal communities and making those culturally appropriate referrals when possible. So knowing the resources that are out there to serve Indigenous communities, both in the rural and urban communities. And in the Four Corners region, we hear specifically the same issues that we hear in any rural community, right? Lack of resources, but also in particularly in tribal communities in that region, lack of access even to internet or law enforcement that's going to respond. So there's a lot of confusion around jurisdiction in the regions around near and on the reservations, whether or not certain laws that are broken, who breaks them is what calls out who responds, right? There's a lot of really interesting nuances with law enforcement response in that region, and I think building some of those bridges and working together again in partnership with our allies in that movement is the way to go as far as prevention.
Great, thank you. All right, last question is for Caleb. I think we have a few more minutes. And there was a story that you described that is in the report, and I was hoping that you could briefly talk about it some more. So basically, you helped someone who had been a victim of labor trafficking to get a T visa, and you described it as a goal to create a system where you don't have to get lucky for things to work out. So if you could tell us a little more about that story and what you meant by that.
Yeah, so in this particular situation, has a really good happy ending, because he got very lucky in a lot of different places. But the system that we have now, the immigration system we have now, is very inflexible. And you usually don't have those ways where it can bend and help somebody when a mistake occurs. Like, for example, it can be a timing issue where if you don't apply for asylum with 1 year of your entry date, if you apply the day after, so in 367 days or something, you don't qualify any longer. And so when an individual is facing other kinds of challenges, like we've talked about housing, I have clients where they're in a very unstable housing situation, so it becomes very difficult for them just to meet their basic needs, which means that they're not responsive to me. And when they're not responsive to me, it's hard for me to do their case. And so we may not be able to build their case and get it completed within the time period necessary, because there's different time periods on different types of cases. So like in this situation with this client, he's a youth, and so youth are also going through all kinds of challenges, like their brains are developing. They don't necessarily have their priorities set to where know what's going to be the most important thing. And so with this youth, he would show up, we'd work, and then he would disappear for long periods of time. And so we wouldn't be able to work on his case. And so he was able to have some great collaboration of people in the community to identify the trafficking, work together to get him outside of the trafficking, get him connected to me, and where he may not be connected to somebody who can help with his case, but he had those resources that connected him, saw the trafficking that was occurring inside of a home, and then got to some people who could help him get out of it. Whereas other individuals may not have that lucky situation where you had somebody looking into the home here he was at so he could get connected. And then once he was working with me, at one point, he disappeared on me. And what had happened is we filed his T visa, so he worked with me long enough to get it filed, but he has all kinds of other things going on in his life, and they ended up taking priority. He lost his phone, he didn't have my number, I didn't have his number, I couldn't get in contact with him. We got a request from the government saying, you need to reply by this date to address these issues, and if you don't, then we're going to deny the application. I couldn't get in touch with him. I thought we were going to lose the T visa. He also was in removal proceedings, also extremely inflexible. You miss a court date, they can order you removed. And you can miss a court date for many reasons. They send it to your house, but you've moved and you don't have that, you didn't get that mailing. There can be lots of reasons why they miss a court date. Very inflexible. You miss it, you order removed. He had an upcoming court date. I couldn't get in touch with him. I was afraid he was going to get ordered removed. He had a very strong T case, survivor of trafficking. He was eligible and deserved all of these benefits, but he's dealing with a lot. And to be trauma-informed, you want to deal with those things, but our system is not trauma-informed. He just happened to get lucky because we had the pandemic of COVID, which meant that his court hearing got canceled. And so he didn't get ordered removed because his hearing didn't happen. And then because of COVID, they gave some flexibilities in responding to RFEs. We missed the deadline, so I thought it was done, but we never got sent the denial. Instead, 2 years later, they sent me a second RFE, which usually doesn't happen. But they sent me a second RFE, a request for evidence. So I use the terms of fresh and some request for evidence. And so then I was like, oh, let me try to connect with him again. It's been 2 years, but he's got another chance. And so I found him on Facebook, got in touch with him, and said, hey, you have another chance. Do you want to work with me again? He's like, absolutely. And he was in a much more stable situation, very responsive. We filed the request for evidence, and his T was approved. And then he's now in a position where we're applying to be a permanent resident. We were able then to apply to terminate his proceedings, so he's no longer at risk of being removed. And so it was a very good outcome for him, but he had to get lucky from a pandemic. Because we don't have a system that is trauma-informed and provides the flexibility necessary to recognize that people are dealing with a lot, and they can't always meet the demands of an inflexible system. So that's where the change needs to happen. And so we can create a system where he did not have to get lucky for him to get that T visa granted.
Wow, thank you so much. I think that is a wonderful way to end this particular part of the night, and thank you so much for telling your story. And Kara, thank you so much for sharing all your insights and expertise with the group. All right.
Thank you. I want to continue to encourage you to feel free to get up during the program, continue to eat food, get drinks, those kinds of things. And 3 conversations, deep breath, that was number 1. Okay, we're ready for number 2. As the folks from the second group are starting to make their way to the stage, I'm going to give some introductions, starting with Maria Trujillo, who is the Human Trafficking Program Manager with the Colorado Department of Public Safety, Division of Criminal Justice. Maria is in fact the senior staff member with the Colorado Human Trafficking Council, which, if you're not familiar with, is our furthest reaching partnership in the state. We're going to be talking partnerships with this group. Maria has helped lead the statewide public awareness campaign, This is Human Trafficking. She's an incredible partner, and she's been involved in this movement for a long time. And all the way from Grand Junction, we have Tom Acker with us, who represents another historic and important partnership on the Western Slope, and that is WSAT, Western Slope Against Trafficking in Grand Junction. His work with WSAT advocating for the rights of migrant sheep herders and others is featured in the report. Again, you can find WSAT's story in here, which is really special. Tom is also a recently retired professor at Colorado Mesa University, but he's still so involved in this issue that he drove down from Grand Junction. If you drove further tonight than Tom, you get a prize, but he's here and he's with us. And hosting this conversation is the Dr. Annie Miller, who is currently the Associate Dean at the University of Colorado at Denver's School of Public Affairs. She's also a co-principal investigator on the Colorado Project 2023 and has served on LCHT's board of directors since 2015, if I'm not mistaken. That predates my time here. Amazing. Dr. Miller, I'm going to turn it over to you. Let's welcome this group.
Thank you. I get the best spot talking about partnerships and trust, equity, and effectiveness. This is so cool. Thank you guys for coming tonight. Tom, I'm going to start with you. Question 1, don't hand the mic off. No, it's your turn. So a lot of you in this room might know or be familiar with the work that Tom has done, but your history on the Western Slope has been really connected to the migrant sheep herders who work ranches in that part of the state. And so this is a group that has been really at risk for exploitation, and particularly for labor trafficking, which isn't as common of a topic for us to talk about around human trafficking. So I'm curious about how your advocacy work and the ways in which you've worked with this population. How did your partnership raise awareness? And then how did you all organize for meaningful action? What do you think your partnership has done for this group around effectiveness, and what did that look like to organize in those ways?
Yeah, so quick cap of the history, but the Colorado Legal Services organized a survey study in which I participated, as did Ignacio Alvarado and other people that were working on this issue as well. We went out and interviewed 90 sheep herders, so we had a critical mass of folks, And the survey was very well designed. It asks, what are you getting paid? How many hours do you work? What are your health conditions? Do you have control of your documents? All this stuff that kind of points to whether you're being trafficked or not. And so that was brought to the public's attention, and through collaboration, we were able to petition to get their wages raised from $700 a month to, well, right now they're earning close to $2,000 a month. So it was a collaboration again. It was Colorado Legal Services, people on the ground, former sheep herders, etc. Community allies, yeah.
Maria, you've been the senior staff member for Colorado's farthest reaching anti-trafficking partnership, and that's the Governor's Council. I guess that's the abbreviation. The full title is the Governor's Council to...
Actually, it's the Governor's Colorado Human Trafficking Council.
Thank you. That's probably on my notes. I'm probably still misnaming it. But and you've been there since 2014. So your commitment in that role signals your belief in the power of coalitions, and that these coalitions make a difference against trafficking. How have you seen that achieved through your work with the council, and what are you proud of that has made that kind of partnership possible?
Yeah, I think that's a wonderful question. Prior to coming back to my home state in Colorado, I ran a coalition within Houston to address human trafficking. So I have a long-standing affinity to coalitions and building collaboration across this issue. And really, I think it's the only way to be successful, is for collaboration to happen. And we have really seen a lot of amazing work being accomplished by the Colorado Human Trafficking Council in our last 9 years. It's amazing that it's been 9 years now. And some of the things that I'm most proud of is some of the pieces of recommendations for statutory reform that have become law. The Colorado Human Trafficking Council in 2015 recommended making child sex trafficking a form of child abuse and neglect. What a novel idea. And we, at the time, recommended both sex trafficking and labor trafficking of a minor. It took a couple more years, up to 2019, for labor trafficking of a minor to also be a form of child abuse and neglect. And that has really created a sea change in terms of response within the child welfare system. And they are also, one of our recommendations was to have a screening tool be used to identify risk for human trafficking. That has been in place since 2018. So that's really exciting to see those things come to fruition. We also, one of my prouder moments in terms of statutory reform is seeing our wage theft laws changed in Colorado. As a recommendation in 2018 from the Colorado Human Trafficking Council, we made a recommendation that that labor should be a thing of value that is subject to theft. Just like stealing a car has value. So if you steal a car that's a value of $50,000, that's subject to theft, then there's a fine that comes into play for that $50,000. But if you steal the labor, the wages of an individual for their labor in the amount of $50,000, all there was prior to this change was a unclassified misdemeanor and a $300 fine. We helped push a change to say labor is a thing of value that's subject to theft, and therefore should follow the theft statutes that we have for material things. And that then created wage theft as a crime, not an unclassified misdemeanor, but an actual crime, all the way up to an F2 felony. So that was a pretty big sea change that I'm really proud to see and to have that shepherd along. And then I also, the last thing I'll just say, my baby of things that I love about the Colorado Human Trafficking Council is the work that we did to create a statewide public awareness campaign. We spent 3 years to do formative research on the idea of doing a public awareness campaign, really spent thoughtful time and researching and being intentional with every single decision, because we didn't want to make the same mistakes as other people have made. We didn't want to make a campaign that was sensationalized. We wanted to make sure it was responsive to what Colorado residents understood or didn't understand about human trafficking. And And then we launched it for 3 years. So it was like a 7-year project at the end. And that was something that I was really proud to see come to fruition, and it's still out there in the world. If you want to look it up, the campaign website is thisishumantrafficking.com.
And I have posters in the back of my car if you want one.
He'll be hawking them after the event. No. I'm actually going to follow up for both of you a second. I'm going off script a little bit here, but both of you are really knowledgeable about labor trafficking and the way that different partnerships have managed working against labor trafficking. Do you mind really quickly following up on some tangible examples for audience members who maybe aren't as familiar with that portion of trafficking, and thinking about how your partnership had the conversation around labor trafficking and the ways in which your partnership really got to action on it? Because I think a lot of folks come at this from more of the minor route, which you described with some of the legislation, or around sex trafficking. How did you educate your partnerships on labor trafficking? And for Tom, it was always there. And then tell us a little bit about how you make that tangible example to public or other partners who might want to join your partnership around combating labor trafficking.
Well, I think with any marginalized group or any vulnerable population, if you're not interacting with that group, you're not going to go anywhere. So for me, a priority is talking to the immigrant community, talking to the sheep herders in this case, but also right now I was just talking to Caleb that we have recently arrived Ecuadorians, Venezuelans, Hondureños in our community in Grand Junction. And those people are, I don't know how they helicoptered in, but they're completely cut off, and they're paranoid, and they're being exploited right now as we're talking. And unless you talk to them, they're not going to come out. They're not going to be public. It's a really scary situation they're in. And so unless you engage with that population, you know, nothing's going to happen. You need to understand what their vulnerabilities are in order to make structural change to address those vulnerabilities. Yes.
I think when it came to the council, there was that evolution of a need for education. A lot of the original council members had come at the issue from a sex trafficking lens, but they, as a group, really recognize the need to further educate themselves about labor trafficking in particular prior to making any recommendations around labor trafficking. So they spent several years having speakers come in and doing deep dive studies and understanding the environment in which labor trafficking operates, or labor happens in Colorado, and where those vulnerability points might be, and what kind of industries that might look like, you know, not just sheep herders, but other industries throughout Colorado, and really spent a lot of time educating ourselves before then turning to make recommendations about like statutory reform. And one of the speakers that we had come in from San Francisco area had made the recommendation that they were really successful at, like, how can we find ancillary charges around labor trafficking as we've done with sex trafficking. So with sex trafficking, you had these ancillary charges like pimping and prostitution and having a house of prostitution, like these types of things that you could start opening an investigation on. And one of the things that we heard in our learning was that wage theft is a really great starting point to start an investigation. All labor trafficking involves wage theft. Workers' comp claims, are there violations in workers' comp? Looking at that piece. So we brought a lot of experts to the table to talk about what those ancillary charges might be and how can law enforcement and prosecutors start those investigations. And I think in terms of the public, we really made a very intentional decision with our public awareness campaign to feature several scenarios of labor trafficking. We had created, kind of our campaign strategy was creating these lived experience narratives about human trafficking in Colorado. And out of the 6 scenarios, 4 of them are focused on labor trafficking and the various types of labor trafficking that could happen across the state. And they're all based on real stories, talking with survivors, things like that. So I think that was a really great way to emphasize the importance, because we heard from the research that we did that the vast majority of Colorado residents didn't know about labor trafficking. And we wanted, as one of our communication goals, is to help people have a holistic understanding of the issue. And so that was a very intentional decision and has, I think, made it easier for people to wrap their heads around it.
Thank you. So, Tom, one of the key takeaways in the Colorado Project 2023 report is the fact that anti-trafficking partnerships still lack critical representation in their coalitions, which will be necessary to be effective. So this includes survivors, organizations supporting underrepresented groups like immigrants, tribal communities, sex workers, youth, individuals with LGBTQ+ identities. Your partnership in Grand Junction, WSAT, set up a coalition of professors, healthcare professionals, and criminal justice workers when it first began. Can you talk about how you've approached representation in your membership over time? You've been established for a long time. And then how did you get people to the table?
So that's an interesting, AJ was there, and she was part of this whole process. Initially, we hosted CLS, Colorado Legal Services, hosted a conference in which we invited a bunch of community members at the university to come and talk about different aspects of human trafficking. And as a result of that, and this is the important thing about labor trafficking, when you go against a sex trafficker, more often than not, he's a marginalized kind of criminal, he may be of that ilk. When you go after a corporate leader, they have power. And when we organized the faculty members at my college, the administration was communicated by a wealthy sheep herder that was a friend of the administration. And there was really dangerous fallout, because if you know, faculty members are kind of vulnerable when it's time for tenure, you know? And so right away, those colleagues, they pulled back. And subsequent to that, we have one of them left. She was the nurse in the medical faculty, and a number of others, law enforcement, faculty, et cetera, all pulled back. So we were left with basically community members. Luckily, right now we have a survivor. We have the former director of a woman's housing for trafficked women. We have a woman who is on the staff of the Children's Center. And we have lots of collaborations with law enforcement and other community entities. But it was an interesting evolution. But I think it's really important that we understand, and I want to mention one more thing. Have any of you followed what happened in Brighton through Star's Farm? The Star Farm hired H-2A workers, perfectly legal. The trouble is, Star Farm went bankrupt. Those workers, dozens of them, were just cut loose. They had no income, and if you're here on an H-2A visa, you can't go and work in another place. And so those guys were like scrambling. They didn't know what to do. And read the article. It was in the Denver Post. It's really good. But the reason I'm mentioning this is structurally, and this is the important of the study that these guys did, you need to look upstream to see what's causing these situations. So structurally, the way we bring in foreign labor to work in our country, that's leaving them open for exploitation. And we as consumers are eating Kroger vegetables, whatever, supermarket. That's where Star's selling their produce. If we are, as consumers, letting this all happen, then we are, in fact, participating in human trafficking and labor abuses. So this is part of what being educated is all about. And I forgot what your question was.
Well, I love that you raised supply chain issues. That feels like a very tangible thing that an audience member could walk away from this conversation thinking about. Like, where do I get goods and services that I access every single day? So I love that you raised this point, actually, and who cares about my question? No, because I think you raised such a good point, because I think you can sit in a crowd sometimes and feel like, well, this is all really good information, but what do I do with it? And that's a super tangible thing to think about, like when we talk about sustainability or climate change, you know, recycle or compost. But in this scenario, think about where your produce comes from. Think about where your marijuana comes from. Think about, you know, wherever your goods and resources come from. Like, that's a really important concept. So thank you for raising that. Maria, and similar question, I guess, to you, so we will revisit the question. No. How has the council worked to create representation in its membership? And I know yours is a little different because there's some statutory guidelines and requirements in the membership composition. But more importantly, how does that lead to a more effective partnership? Like, what is it about, more equitable representation that might lead to effectiveness?
Yeah, I would say, like many entities and organizations, representation and equitable representation is a work in progress. And it's certainly a work in progress with the council. As you mentioned, one of the challenges and also benefits is that the council is legislatively created, and all of the roles of people who can serve on the council are set out in statute. On the one hand, it is highly representative from like a sector perspective. It has a lot of different disciplines involved, and I think that's really important and is one of the reasons why the council has made really rich decisions and have a rich decision-making process, because you have law enforcement and academia and victim service providers and survivors and faith-based organizations and all these different actors coming together to talk through and make decisions. And at the same time, we could do a lot better job having, being more equitable in our representation and finding people that represent different viewpoints. And so that's always something that we're working on. We have those council members that are kind of like listed in statute, but then we also have a lot of task forces, and that's when we try to bring other community stakeholders who are missing from the table at the council to help make those decisions at the task force level, and we could really have a lot more control over that piece. And also making the council itself more of a welcoming, safe environment. It's run out of a government agency. It definitely has that government thing going on for it, for good or for bad. And so how do we make the council a more welcoming space where people feel able and willing to come? And I think that's also a big work in progress that we've been really trying to dive into. And as a small preview, we've made a lot of recommendations this past year when the council's report comes out as really specific ways on how to do that. And so that's a big step that we're trying to make always, is like, how can we make this space better, and how can we make it more welcoming and safe, and therefore people wanting to be at the table too.
Thank you. I got the signal to wrap up. So I'm going to actually leave everyone with this last question that as we mingle after the event, if you work in this space or you're curious to learn more from these amazing leaders on partnership, ask folks what's the one thing that they could do to increase trust, effectiveness, or equity in partnerships. And both of these esteemed leaders have answers to that question for you, but I think a lot of you in this room have answers for that question too. So I'd encourage conversation about that specifically afterward, and thank you both again for coming tonight.
Thank you. A lot of hard work, these partnerships, and a couple of great folks doing that. Okay, deep breath, here we go. We're about to move into the final section of the evening, and as we do that, we're actually gonna focus this last block of time on listening to several survivors and lived experience experts, all of whom actually participated directly in shaping the Colorado Project 2023 report and action plan. Two of them will be joining us on stage in a minute. But first, we actually have a short video from one of those lived experience experts who could not be in Denver tonight, but they wanted to join us through a short video. And so Jose Alfaro, he's an expert on domestic child sex trafficking. He's a leading voice nationally who courageously shares his experience in a lot of spaces and advocates for not only awareness, but what can be done to prevent exploitation. He recently testified in front of Congress. We asked Jose, because he couldn't be here tonight, to share briefly through video around the Colorado Project takeaways, and specifically around survivor inclusion, which we're going to talk about more, and how he chose to be involved in this work. And we also asked him to talk about the marginalization of LGBTQ plus youth and how he believes we can do better around supporting kids who may be vulnerable to exploitation like he was. So we're just going to take a few minutes to listen to Jose, and then we'll introduce our last conversation.
Hi everyone, my name is Jose Alfaro and I'm a lived experience expert on domestic minor sex trafficking. I'm currently on the board of the Human Trafficking Legal Center and HEAL. I also work with many different agencies from the National Center of Missing and Exploited Children and the Department of Justice, just to name a few. My main goal is to kind of identify gaps within the many different systems to help our youth, to help and protect our youth, especially youth coming from marginalized and underserved communities. I want to start off by saying that sharing your story is never easy, especially when you're sharing about trauma. But I initially shared for the first time without really having a choice by testifying in a criminal trial against my trafficker. And then shortly after that, I was asked by the U.S. Attorney's Office if I'd be interested in sharing with law enforcement what happened to me. And I will say it was probably the most embarrassing, trauma porn-filled, victimized story that I'd ever shared, but that's kind of where I was at the time. Now, as I began sharing more publicly, I started to get messages from men in their 50s, 60s, and 70s who were telling me that they never had the courage to come out and share what happened to them, whether it be some form of sex abuse from a family member or a friend, or even a trafficking situation. And so it really, really just shocked me. But at the same time, I could relate because I lived in silence for at least a decade where I didn't know that what happened to me was human trafficking. Better yet, my trafficker had kind of basically blamed me and silenced me by telling me that if I ever shared my story with anyone, then I would end up going to prison. And so that silencing that left me silenced for about 10 years, those 10 years were probably some of the most traumatic years of my life, of using drugs and alcohol as a way to cope, really just burning relationships, losing jobs. And I think for me, I don't want anyone to have to go through that silence and know that it is safe to come out and come forward and share your experience. But at the same time, even if it just means seeking a therapist and seeking the help that you need to move forward with your life, would mean everything to me, because I think that there are many men who, or even just survivors in general, who've lived in silence, who are either really just addicted to drugs, maybe in prison, or worst of all, no longer with us. And so I think that is the reason why I continue to share and what kind of keeps me going and working within this movement. I truly believe that human trafficking is such a nuanced issue. I think we can all agree on that. But when I really challenge the systems, the intent behind challenging systems is more so because I believe that there were many opportunities for different systems or people working within the systems to step in and help give me the proper support that I needed so that I didn't end up vulnerable to a predator like my trafficker or a pedophile. And so when you look at human trafficking through a systemic lens, you're going to recognize that the driving force there, more times than most, is money, whether you're looking at it from the predator's perspective or the victim's perspective. And so I truly believe that if people weren't living in poverty, weren't living in survival, and trying to find ways to eat or looking for support, then a lot of times this would alleviate situations where they're looking for other people to help them and support them in their situation, or become vulnerable to a trafficker or a pedophile. And so I think that that is the biggest reason why I challenge the systems. But at the same time, I think we can also agree that there is a lot of racism and homophobia that exists within our nation. And so I think that that kind of bleeds through our systems as well. And so when we have one of the most vulnerable populations, our youth, becoming vulnerable to these types of crimes, I think it's really important that we remove all of those biases and really do some reframing and maybe even some firing and rehiring within the system so that we hire people that really view all humans as human beings and give them the proper support that they need. My comments to keeping kids safe, then we have to love and accept them, comes from a lot of times comes from my own experience, right? At the age of 16, my parents kicked me out of my home because of my sexuality. I think that if I had had parents who had supported and loved me unconditionally, and if I had parents that I could come to and talk to and share what it was that I was going through and what I was experiencing, I never would have gone online looking for support from a stranger. Better yet, I never would have come in contact with my first abuser. Better yet, I never would have ended up in the hands of my trafficker. And so my message to all parents or anyone interacting with children is to make sure that you have those open conversations without any biases and just accept, listen, and love them. And I think at the end of the day, it's going to create a lot of prevention or preventative measures from them ending up in situations like I did.
All right, we're going to thank Jose, even though he's not with us in the room. Deeply appreciate love and acceptance as a tool for prevention. And Jose has been an incredible partner on this project and with LCHT. He promised to visit us in Colorado next time. But let's move to our last conversation now. I'm going to invite those folks to the stage who are part of this last conversation. Come on up, and I'll introduce them as they do as we step into our third and final conversation. We have Rebecca Layton, who is an educator, advocate, activist, and community member. She's a consultant at the local and national level and has aided in building programs centered around communities in areas such as peer support, trauma recovery, I'm getting caught here, trauma recovery, community-based advocacy, and building community accountability. Rebecca, welcome. Jenny Footle is an artist, activist, entrepreneur in the anti-trafficking movement. She runs a nonprofit, Beautiful Feet Wellness, that focuses on long-term support for survivor wellness and community. Jenny's been working with survivors of exploitation and the organizations that support them for more than a decade. And hosting this conversation, we have our very own Dr. Annjanette Alejano Steele. You may know her as AJ, who is the research director and co-founder here at LCHT. AJ is a co-principal investigator on the Colorado Project 2023. She has been part of this research endeavor from the very, very beginning. And so we're privileged to have AJ here. She's also a professor in the Department of Health at MSU Denver. Go Roadrunners. All right, here's AJ.
Good evening, everybody. So as with our previous iterations of the Colorado Project tonight, we are celebrating the broad involvement of lived experience experts in this project. We had a team of research consultants, we had action plan reviewers, and survivor participants. So as we move into this last panel, we're embodying and giving voice to what Maria and Tom noted from their perspectives as leaders of anti-trafficking partnerships. Our panel will delve deeper into membership that must prioritize survivors and organizations supporting underrepresented groups that we keep naming for you throughout this evening. Members must reflect the communities that they serve and don't yet serve. So we'll address a handful of questions in this regard with Rebecca and Jenny, who I would like to have highlight their involvement in anti-trafficking efforts as lived experience leaders in Colorado. Rebecca, can we have you go first?
Sure, thank you. My name's Rebecca. I use she, her pronouns. I'm governor appointed to sit on the laboratory to combat, the Governor's Council that we heard about earlier. I also do a lot of consulting work at the local, national, and international levels, doing survivor engagement and lots of different things. I also do a lot of work in advocacy around restorative justice and criminal record relief for survivors of human trafficking and adjacent anti-violence spaces. So.
Like you said, my name is Jenny, and I do run a nonprofit in Denver. We do a lot of awareness research as well as direct services for survivors, namely in Colorado. I work on a lot of research, advisory boards, panels, discussions, these types of things. And so that is a lot of things we do. We do it from a public health lens is how we do our work, and so that is very important to us in the work that we do. I do.
Thank you both. Thank you both for being here. As I kindly remind folks that you are not here to represent all lived experience experts as you share your involvement in the field. We respect that your observations are your own as we honor what you share this evening. Okay, so as we listen to the last panel provide examples of partnership efforts, Colorado Project 2023 noted challenges voiced by partnerships about members and the composition of their memberships. This is centrally about diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. So Rebecca, we'd appreciate your own observations or comments on survivor involvement in anti-trafficking partnerships and its importance.
Yeah, so I think a lot of what we've seen over the last decade, 2 decades, I've been in this work for a little over a decade now, and the representation has really been centric around survivors who were women, young girls, white presenting, right? And so there's been a lot of lack of representation across the board. I really got into a lot of the work that I do because of my lived experience, but also because of my passion for social justice and reform within our broader social systems. And so I do really think that it's important to start thinking about who is at the seat of the table, who is on our boards, who is working as our staff, who is working in our HR departments, and who are they representing? Because our clients or clients that partnerships are working with have to be represented in every level. And so we can't do that unless we're looking at farther social justice issues like race, equity, inclusion, all of these things, LGBTQ, and intersecting identities, because most folks who have lived experience also have other intersecting identities that lead them into a space of higher vulnerability. And so I think that's a really important issue for us to all start looking at, because if we can't really understand where our systems are impacting us, we're gonna have a harder way of understanding what is the underlying issues in our social, society that is leading people to be more vulnerable to exploitation, to violence, and to all of these other things.
Thank you. Yeah. And so with our turnout this evening, we do have members of the broad Colorado anti-trafficking community here, some who are partnership leaders who are dedicated to building inclusive partnerships, and some who are just starting out. Building upon equity in membership, but more importantly, inclusion from each of your perspectives, what are the most vital elements to ensure that survivor inclusion is meaningful and not just tokenism? How do groups and partnerships build trust and invite lived experience experts into a space where they can both participate and lead? So Jenny, if you could lead us off, please.
Yes, I would say in the research field, we often press for community-based participatory research, which means that you are bringing in the community that you're doing research on from the very beginning. From before you create the hypothesis for what it is you're trying to research, you're bringing in the community to even discover what it is you need to look at. And all the way down through the research process, through the conclusion, through the presentation, you're including the community at every step of the way. And I think this can also be put over into partnerships. It can be applied to partnerships as well. Whenever we are looking at our organizations, we see a lot of rubber stamp type situation happen where you'll have a survivor on the board and then you'll say, we're survivor informed. but how much does that survivor know about what's actually going on in the organization? How much influence or impact do they have? If you have a survivor advisory council, who are they meeting with? How much leverage do they actually have? How much are they informing it? Do you have survivors on your staff? Are you trauma informed in your staff so that you have resilience among your partnerships and people don't slide out the back door because of different things that are happening? And so I think applying the CPBR to partnerships and to our organizations and the communities that we serve is really what's going to help. And I would say that, especially when it comes to human trafficking, we're all on a journey to learning more, which is why we're here. We're still doing research, right? And so noting that we're all learning, the landscape is constantly changing and we're constantly learning new things. So being on that journey with survivors as well, as they learn, as they grow, is really going to be a part of it, and acknowledging that we're on this journey together. So staying curious and asking questions, being on the journey together instead of looking at them for all the answers when they're also discovering things, and also thinking that you have more of the answers because you spent more time in school or what have you. Knowing that we're learning together and we're on this journey together. So just being humble in that regard and just applying it through all the different layers and all the different levels is really helpful for including survivors. So.
Yeah, I don't have a lot more to add to that. You did a really good job there. But even outside of like the research space and our collaboration, like our community, like survivors who are on our boards, survivors that we're serving, survivors who are working in various spaces within the anti-trafficking movement or sector, are also coming from our communities. And so if we're not working with the communities that our survivors are a part of, then we're not getting adequate representation, we're not getting the full story, and we're not actually really working to end or to address the current or future issues that are happening. And so I think that community is really, it can be a small community, it can be our partnerships, it can be organizations, task forces, whatever portion of the community we're working with, our survivors are coming from those communities. And so survivor voices have to be represented, and those communities also have to be part of that.
Thank you both. So as you both voiced the building of trust and inclusion, Jenny, can you share a time when your input as a lived experience expert was meaningfully valued and treated with care by a group, an agency, or a partnership? What did doing this well look like for you?
Yeah, I would love to share. I feel like we could, teach a whole weekend on things gone wrong in this movement, especially working with survivors. So I would love to highlight something that went well, so you kind of get an idea of what it looks like to do something well. I was working with a graduate student on their research project, and up front, they were very transparent, they were very informative, they gave a layout of exactly what was going to happen, what their goal was, what my involvement was, where the information was going to go, how long it would take, and that they would give me the results at the end. And so that was really good. There was also compensation involved. And so I just really, it wasn't that much compensation, but I honestly valued their respect and all the steps they took to make it a very professional and working relationship. And so I participated on her project and informed her project. And she reached out to me and said, would you like to see the results? And in the future, would you like to potentially present on it with me if the opportunity arises? And I said, yes. And she did actually send me the results whenever it was done, which is important and doesn't always happen. And then she got hired on after grad school. She got hired on at a larger research institution and looped back around. And we were able to collaborate and come together from the get-go and inform some of those kind of think tank brainstorming sessions of, this is what we want to address. What should we even look at? what are the things that are actually important to survivors? And so I was there with her on that, and then there whenever they were refining it, and then there whenever we were literally doing the layout for what it was gonna look like, and the wording down to, I mean, literally everything. And so just brought me along the way. And then as the research, I'm looking forward to it coming out and presenting it with them, and also applying it in my areas, in my arenas, working in the anti-trafficking field. And so this is just one example how you've taken it and you've come back around. I appreciated her remembering me, continuing to work with me, and not just, thank you for your time. I'm gonna go off and be great and be an awesome researcher. Thank you so much for helping me get there, goodbye. But actually taking me along and saying, you did really good at informing me before. I want you to inform over here now, and do you know other people? And what can we do to make this richer and better? And just including me all along the way. And so that's a really good example of it gone well.
Again, we thank you both for sharing examples from your insights. We know we could easily spend another hour hanging out up here on the stage together. So with this last question, we'd love for each of you to share one thing that you're working on right now, something that you're proud of. Rebecca.
I'm working on several projects. This is a hard one to choose from, but I wanted to go to law school, but I didn't want to be a lawyer because I didn't like the system that we currently have in place. And so I spent a lot of time, I spent my entire grad school experience at a law school studying along JD students, not to get a JD, but in a degree that I don't know how I'm ever going to make a lot of money doing. But it was really, really informative to like how our legal system works. And I've done advocacy for many years around criminal record relief and around just survivors who have a lot of intersecting identities with the criminal justice system in general, or the criminal legal system. And so I've been really fortunate recently to start doing consulting work with various spaces that are interested in how restorative justice or restorative justice informed work could start coming into the anti-trafficking field. And so that's really, really encouraging because many survivors, I've known personally many survivors who are really, near and dear to my heart, who have lack of access to certain things because of the records that they received while they were in their trafficking experience. And so that's a really exciting thing to be starting to do.
Yeah, also lots of projects. But like I said, I do work from a public health perspective. If you're unfamiliar with what that even means, it means looking at someone's health from a holistic perspective, looking at their environment, their socioeconomic, their historical trauma, racism, also their physical health, mental, emotional, all the things that factor into someone being healthy. And so a huge part of that is prevention. That's our ultimate goal of public health, is to prevent it in the first place. And so there has been a race in Denver that has been happening for the last 12 years, and the previous organizer was unable to continue, and so we're reviving it this year. It's called the Feet for Justice Run, and it's a way that the community can actually be involved. And I think what's cool about this project that I am currently working on, it's November 5th, so you can all come, walk, run, is that it actually brings the community together. So it doesn't just benefit my organization. The lab will actually be there represented and benefiting from it. So 100% of the race registration goes back to anti-trafficking nonprofits who participate, and they're all able to show up, and we bring the community in so they can meet the different organizations and find out what is being done about trafficking from Colorado organizations, both globally and locally. And so it's a prevention, information, also resource sharing, lots of things, and promoting people's wellness because it's a race, all in one. And so I just really love this project. I love the opportunity to answer the question for community members of what can I do. And so this is just one of the things that we're doing. And so I'm really excited to bring it back and be operating it for 2023.
You two are amongst the busiest people that I know, and we are so grateful for your time with us this evening. Can everybody please join me in thanking Rebecca and Jenny for being with us this evening? Thank you both. let's take a stretch just for a second as I wrap things up for our event this evening. Our research and action program is designed to amplify voices, produce research, and propel actions moving forward. We invite you to take the time, absorb the ways in which our panels have embodied and voiced the key takeaways from the report, and delve deeper into the complexities of trust, equity, and effectiveness as we work to keep Colorado safe. We're proudly uplifting the work of 18 partnerships and hundreds of survivors and practitioners who have persevered in keeping trafficking on our radars. As we share presence in this space tonight, we hope you've refined your actions to end human trafficking. As we close this gathering, propel you back to your evenings and your morning email inboxes, what will linger? Housing insecurity, actions to support marginalized groups like immigrants, youth experiencing homelessness, our Native Indigenous brothers and sisters, supporting one of the 18 partnerships working their tails off in Colorado. LCHT exists to ensure statewide representation of those doing this difficult work and to provide evidence to enhance their work. You are part of the mix of sentinels who keep human trafficking ever present. You are the extensions of the hope we see. Quoting Brené Brown, hope is not a warm, fuzzy emotion that fills us with a sense of possibility. Hope is a way of thinking, a cognitive process. Hope sits at the heart of LCHT's work as a community-based organization. We experience hope through 3 ways. We experience hope when we have the ability to set realistic goals to end human trafficking in Colorado. Our statewide advisory board created the Colorado Project 2023 action plan to set goals and point the paths forward. And if you haven't picked one up, we've got many over here at the table in the back. We experience hope when we are able to figure out how to achieve these goals, including the way to stay flexible. 18 task forces and hundreds of resources across Colorado have persevered through a pandemic as we continue to navigate social change. We celebrate ways that we continue this work together in comprehensive ways and to attend to shoring up trust and equity as we strive to do better, armed with data. Finally, we experience hope when we have agency, when we believe that we can do this independently and, more importantly, together. We persist when we communicate transparently and we have one another's backs. We persist when we work to make sure we're not missing key partners, and we're invested in measuring how we work to successfully end human trafficking together. And we still have a lot of work ahead. We have to keep going. So as we close, our staff and board are available for questions, follow-ups, and resources to keep working together to end human trafficking. LCHT's hope is to provide evidence for possible pathways and support colleagues to make it through this difficult work. When our goals, pathways, and agency are tested, and when change is actually felt and possible, hopes to end human trafficking are forged. Thank you for choosing to spend time with us this evening. Be safe as you leave us for the evening. Thank you, everybody, for being here.